What's going on, everybody? We are currently in the mecca of mountain biking, Whistler Bike Park. If you clicked on this video, you probably know all about Whistler and its long history as being one of the best bike parks in the world, the host of Red Bull Joyride and the infamous A-Line Jump Trail. It's currently the Sunday before Crankworx, a week filled with tons of racing, riding, events, and lots of fun. But this week, I'm going to be doing one thing on one bike only, banging out laps on Rocky Mountain's all-new SLAYER Park Edition. Retailing for $4,600, the lone downhill build in the SLAYER lineup is geared towards park riders looking for a bulletproof bike that'll withstand summers of abuse. So what better place to put the SLAYER through its paces on a wide variety of proper trails than with a week of riding in Whistler Bike Park. A tall ask for any bike. I'm gonna go knock out laps on the SLAYER to see how it performs, and I'll report back next weekend with how it held up. Introduced in 2001, the SLAYER has long been Rocky's freeride and big mountain bike. Etched into the history of freeride by legendary riders like Wade Simmons, Richie Schley, and Brett Tippie, the latest version maintains the same send-it mentality with an emphasis on durability, adjustability, and descending prowess. The SLAYER continues to use the same 4-bar suspension layout as before, with its defining cross brace between the top tube and down tube and swing link that connects the seat stays and top tube. New for this year, the frame now features longer and slacker geometry, plus a bump up to 180 millimeters of rear wheel travel. The head tube angle has gone from 63.8 to 62.8 degrees in the neutral position, and reach numbers have increased by around 10 millimeters. To help maintain the SLAYER's climbing abilities, the C-tube angle has also steepened by over a degree. Like before, riders have 4 geometry packages at their disposal via Rocky's Ride 4 adjustment system. Switching between each position will also change the progressivity of the suspension. Position 1, or slack, is the most progressive, while position 4, or steep, is the most linear. In addition to the Ride 4 adjustment, riders now have a 2-position flip chip at the rear axle that provides either a 440 or 450 millimeter chainstay length. On the previous model, riders were stuck with a 443 millimeter chainstay. Wheel configuration is size dependent on the SLAYER. Size small and medium frames come with a mixed wheeled setup, while sizes large and extra large come with dual 29-inch wheels. For those looking to experiment with their rear wheel size, all frame sizes can be set up with both wheel configurations via an aftermarket link. At 6 feet tall, I tested a size large SLAYER per Rocky's sizing chart, which provided a 487.3 millimeter reach in the neutral position. However, I rode the bike most in the slack position, which shortened the reach to 472.6 millimeters, increased the bottom bracket drop by 7.4 millimeters, and slackened the head angle by 0.6 degrees. I also tried both chainstay lengths, and I'll dive into how all these setups performed in just a few. Riders have a choice between carbon or aluminum when it comes to frame material, with the only difference being the addition of internal storage on carbon models. The SLAYER lineup is made of 3 carbon and 3 aluminum builds, ranging from $3,799 up to $10,299. The SLAYER 30 Park we tested is the only downhill build in the group. Unlike the rest of the builds that come equipped with a dropper post, 12-speed drivetrain, a 180mm single crown fork, the Park build features SRAM's GX 7-speed drivetrain, DH Casing Maxxis tires, and a 200mm dual crown RockShox Boxer Select fork. A build purely focused on withstanding plenty of abusive descents, it was the perfect option for my testing parameters. All right, a week later, it's the Sunday after Crankworx now. It's been a super fun week getting to see what this bike is all about. My body is pretty tired, but I've been super impressed with how the thing has held up. Let's get into all the impressions. Starting with sizing and geometry. So I'm right around 6 foot and I tested a size large, and I would say that it ran a little bit small. It wasn't so much that it was too much that I couldn't adjust to it and ride. It comes with a pretty short 35mm length stem on this size, and I think personally I would have probably gone to a 50mm stem to kind of help fit the bike a little bit better. Rocky Mountain offers their Ride 4 adjustment system, which gives you basically 4 geometry packages as well as a few tweaks to the kinematics of suspension. Bike arrives in neutral. I rode it in neutral for a few laps and ended up changing to the slack position. Found that the bike was a little bit tough to settle into corners, maybe just riding a little bit tall. Neutral position gave me exactly what I was looking for. Other things I did with kind of setup and geometry, you have 2 rear center positions by a axle dropout flip chip. I ran it most of the week in the short setting, which gives you a 440 millimeter chainstay length on a size large. The large position bumps you up to 450. I ran that only yesterday, and my thought behind it was trying to get a little bit more stability on technical trails, which it did provide that, but as I'll get into with the descending performance of this bike, its strong suit is just ripping bike park laps, jump trails, hitting berms, and the longer chainstay definitely took away from that a little bit. Last few things with just geometry and sizing. The stock bars that come on this, they're just Rocky Mountain bars. I actually did not measure what they were, but they're probably around like a 760 width. It felt super narrow. It kind of felt like an odd spec on a downhill bike, so I ended up putting on my own personal bars that are at 800 mil, which is that's my preference. It might not be the same for everybody. And then I did play around a little bit with the spacers of the headset and how much the fork was dropped in the crown. That was more for personal preference as well. Again, with the size of the bike feeling a little bit short for me, I messed around with dropping the front to keep the front wheel from feeling like it was maybe too far away. I didn't want to run so many spacers that it was pulling my bars even closer to me. I found a setting that, 6-7 days into riding this bike, felt comfortable, able to ride, as I'll get into, able to ride any trail I wanted to at a speed that was super exciting. One last thing, with the change to the slack position and that quite a bit lower bottom bracket drop, the 170 millimeter cranks that come stock on this did feel pretty long. I clipped my pedals way more than I usually do. If I were to get this bike and continue riding it long term, I'd probably jump to 165 millimeter cranks. So getting more into setup of the Slayer as I kind of got into my first few laps, beyond kind of the adjustments I made to the geometry with the flip chips and all of that. For the Boxer Select fork, a few limitations on what external adjustments you have. So I did install 4 bottom out tokens to help with the ramp up of the fork. Outside of that, all you have is rebound and a few clicks of adjustment for compression. Sort of the same story for the Super Deluxe Select rear shock. All you have actually is a rebound adjustment. You can change the shock spring. I did not have springs at my disposal. But I'll get into the performance of the suspension products themselves in a few. Touching on just the suspension performance of the bike itself, it's definitely a 180 millimeter travel bike. It has a very bottomless feel. I don't think I ever rode a trail that felt like was above the abilities of the bike. It has great small bump sensitivity. It's really supple over braking bump chatter. Whistler, Heart of Darkness, if you've ever ridden here, is just like a quarter mile of braking bumps. Very smooth platform over trails like that. Great bottom out support. I over jumped a few new jumps that were new for this summer and had that panic moment where you're like, I think I'm gonna blow out my ankles right now. And oh my God, so deep. Bike soaked it up incredibly well. I think that the shock started to become more of the issue than the bike itself as it became more comfortable on the Slayer. It was most noticeable on really rough technical trails that had harsh, deep compressions in succession. And during those moments, the suspension would begin to pack up a little bit and I'd start to kind of feel that feedback through my feet. It wasn't a huge issue. I was still able to ride the bike at a fun, comfortable pace. Again, it's a free ride bike. It's not a downhill race bike. The only other time I noticed a limitation with the suspension platform and the shock that's on the bike was just trying to, influence my rider weight into the bike, such as pumping through corners, trying to generate speed over rollers or carry momentum through, some of the flow trails here. It was raining this week, we're running a little bit slow. When I would start to push my weight into the bike, it had a bit of a dead feel. There wasn't a whole lot happening in the middle stroke of the shock. I think that's just sort of the nature of running a shock that has maybe a simpler damper, a few less external adjustments. You don't have as many tools on hand to maybe find that exact setup, but again, it still gets the job done. You might just be trying a little bit harder to get this bike through some flowy jump stuff. Alrighty, descending performance. I've probably said it 5 times already in this video, but the key thing with the Slayer in this Park Edition build that they're offering is how much fun it was to ride. It really has that free ride mentality that makes you want to go ride the jump trails, the big bike park berms. That's where this bike is happiest. Even though its strong suits felt like it was more in a bike park setting, it's still incredibly capable on technical terrain. My background is racing downhill, and so I tend to kind of be drawn towards the more raw and technical trails. And the Slayer held its own. I couldn't really find a trail or a section that felt like the bike, I was getting in over my head on it. I think overall, when I think about my last week riding this bike, it performed exactly how I'd want my freeride bike to ride. It was a ton of fun on a variety of trails. It was really easy to, toss around on jumps, slap corners, be in trains with your friends in the bike park, having a ton of fun. And then if I wanted to go, push my abilities, ride some of the new technical stuff on Creekside, I was able to ride a fast, fun pace and, go faster than I would on my enduro bike and have a bit more fun on the jump trails than I would on a downhill race bike. All right, moving on to the performance of the build kit of the Slayer Park Edition. Starting first with the SRAM G2 RE brakes. That was the one component on this bike that all week long when I was in the lift line and I was telling people our concept for this test this week, they look over the bike and get wide eyes being like, they spec that thing with G2 REs? That was my initial impression, and honestly, I'm impressed that I made it to the end of the week with them performing a lot better than I originally expected. The G2 REs definitely lack the feel and modulation I think a lot of people associate and like with SRAM. They also don't quite have the bite or power as some of their higher end models. With that said, I was able to ride any trail I please this week and do a lot of feet of descending, and they've made it out the other side okay. I still think it would be one of the first components I personally would change if I were to continue riding this bike, and that's mostly because, as a bike you're gonna get to ride bike parks and be doing a bunch of laps every day. The hand fatigue and arm pump that these brakes created was pretty bad, and I think it would be, one of the easiest upgrades to just enhance the performance of the bike. Luckily, it does come with a 220 front rotor and a 200mm rear, which did help the situation. I've already touched a lot on the suspension performance already, but one last thing, just touching on the Boxer Select fork. That lack of damping through, really the mid-stroke, everyone's favorite word or favorite term, but that lack of holdup in the fork I felt was probably the single thing that limited my speed on this bike or my comfort when things got really rowdy. There just wasn't a lot of holdup, and I think that second to the brakes, maybe dropping a different damper in this fork or upgrading the fork entirely would be, in my first summer of upgrades I would do. So it's the only Slayer model that comes with a 7-speed drivetrain, and SRAM's GX drivetrain is well known as being a workhorse. This whole week, I was pretty blown away that I had no misshifts, shifted perfectly, and it remained really quiet. I think that is something that anybody who's had a bike and sent it through a bike park for any number of days usually comes out the other end sounding like a bag of bolts. Really impressed with the, maybe I just got a lucky derailleur, but on this bike, it was super quiet the whole time I rode it. And then last thing, touching on the build kit, these RaceFace Arc 30 wheels really blew me away. I did put a cush core in the rear, mainly just for added security. Didn't have to deal with any wheel issues this week. But with that said, both wheels are perfectly straight still. No flat spots, no dents, no issues at all. Really not much more you can ask for from a, kind of budget build downhill bike for bike parks. All right, going into durability itself of this bike, I've been super impressed. The drivetrain was super quiet, but on top of that, the bike itself does not make a lot of noise. No cable rattle, Nothing of those sorts. Probably the only thing you really hear is the hub doesn't have that many points of engagement, so you get that kind of knocking noise every now and again. But other than that, I've had no bolts come loose, which is saying a lot. It's kept that nice kind of tight new bike feel this whole entire week. And for, you know, an aluminum $4,600 bike, it's been pretty rad. You know, I've come to Whistler with much more expensive bikes with much more expensive components and left with a bike that has held up much more poorly and sounds a lot worse. All right, so what's the bottom line on Rocky Mountain Slayer Park Edition? Rocky Mountain has definitely come to the table offering bike park rippers a sweet and solid bike at a reasonable price point that is gonna withstand a lot of abuse and not need too many immediate upgrades. It's been as capable as you'd expect a 180mm travel bike to be, with the added stability of a dual crown up front. It's a bike that does not bat an eye from any trail and is highlighted by its ability to be a ton of fun on your classic bike park trails with jumps and big berms. I think it's a great option for anybody who has access to a chairlift all summer long, or somebody who's in my similar position where you're going on a week-long vacation to ride a bike park. It's a great way to get a durable, solid bike at a good price point, and you're not gonna be putting miles on, say, your daily enduro bike. And to top it off, you would have the option to have a second fork and a second drivetrain. This could be your pedal bike all year long. Change a few things up, now you got a bike park bike for all summer. All right, there you have it, Rocky Mountain Slayer Park Edition. Let us know if you'll be adding a bike park specific bike to your quiver. And for more mountain bike news and reviews, please head to vitalmtb.com. Cheers.